One of the earliest studies was called the IPAR study. It was done at UC Berkeley. They brought some of the most creative people of their generation to UC Berkeley to study them. So Truman Capote was there. Has anyone heard of the famous IPAR studies? So Frank Barron is the one who initiated this. And what did they find about these creative people? Well, they went into it thinking it was going to be like IQ. They thought that was going to be like the big predictor. They thought like and what most of their predictions, actually all of their predictions, were pretty inaccurate because it turned out that they found very perplexing things. They found that the creative people scored sky high on almost every measure of mental illness you could throw at them. But they also found they also scored sky high on every measure of mental health that you could throw at them. So he's like, Frank Barron was like, what do we do with this profile of unique breed of human that simultaneously is okay dipping into, the more... So the way he framed it is they are really good at being intimate with themselves. Creative people are okay with exploring all of these aspects and facets of human nature, but they also have what is called ego resiliency. He found they have a very strong sense of self, and they have a very strong set of skills that allows them to bounce back from setbacks. So it's kind of this interesting toggling thing. So that kind of started this understanding of creative people. So when I entered, the scene of doing my PhD work on creativity and the science of creativity, this is what I had to work with, and it's like, okay, well, how do I operationalize that? And then you look at some more recent studies. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi found almost the exact same thing in a more modern sample. He said, if I had to express in one word what makes their personalities different from others, it's complexity. They show tendencies of thought and action that in most people are segregated. They contain contradictory extremes. Instead of being an individual, each of them is a multitude. Again, great, right? I mean, that's... So I had this idea. I was interviewed by Huffington Post journalist Carolyn Gregoire a couple years ago, and she's like, if in one phrase you had to describe creative people, what would it be? And I was like, messy minds. But creative people, really, they resonated with this idea of the process not being what we push in school, what we push in education, which is efficiency. Expertise is characterized by efficiency, but creativity is characterized by variability. And I really want to show, and I really keep repeating that mantra over and over again. So you find, what do we value in our school system? We value, and even when we select, so I've worked with some business, how should we select for creativity in business? But most business, that we really are selecting for tests for smart people, high test scores, people who think quickly, has anyone in this room taken an IQ test before? I'm not knocking IQ. It's great if you have a high IQ. That's wonderful. I've been to Mensa meetings, not as a Mensa member, but as an observer, and it's great. Having a high IQ is correlated with lots of positive things in this world. It is correlated with what's called executive attention. So the executive attention network is the part of the brain that associates. It's the prefrontal cortex right behind your eyes, and the parietal lobe up here. And as quickly as communication happens between this, you find these people are very good at concentrating on what's in front of you. Very good. So I can tell those in this room right now who have a high executive functioning because they're like really focused on what I'm saying. And if you go, for instance, mindfulness meditation tends to train this brain network, because in this kind of in most mindful meditation, or at least some that involve returning to the breath, it's actually you're getting rid of your daydreams, right? You're getting all that. Whenever your mind wanders, go back to the breath. The mind wanders, go back. So you find that it trains this network. But in recent years, cognitive neuroscientists have discovered a new brain network that was actually an accidental discovery, because in the fMRI machine, cognitive neuroscientists were only interested in what they were interested in. So when they were like, focus on this boring cognitive science task, is this line bigger than this line, or or is this reading comprehension item, everything that was going on in the mind, the rich fantasy world within the mind of that person, was considered noise in the scientific literature. It's error variance, So a bunch of cognitive neuroscientists were like, well, we wonder if there's any actually value to what's going on when a person's at rest, when we're not demanding their attention, like we so often do in society. We demand people's attention. And they discovered this brain network called the default mode brain network, which I like to refer to as the imagination network. I think it's much sexier than the default mode brain network, quite frankly, but you won't really see it described as the imagination network in the published literature. But what was really interesting about this brain network is that instead of on the lateral, so when your attention is focused intensely on the outside world, you see the outside areas active the lateral surface. But this is actually the medial surface of the brain. So whoever designed the brain, evolution, God, whatever, however that happened, it's actually aesthetically beautiful how our brain is hierarchically organized, as well as when we go to our internal thoughts, our dreams, our fantasies, our future wishes, strivings, all these things, you see activations on the inside of the brain, the medial surface, and when we're focused on the outside, you see activations of the lateral surface. So I think it's quite beautiful. And in recent years, some people have called this a paradigm shift a paradigm shift in the field of cognitive neuroscience. You see, the imagination network is associated with daydreaming, imagining and planning the future, retrieving your deeply personal memories, making meaning out of your experiences. So it turns out our construction of our sense of self requires going within this brain network, monitoring one's emotional state, as you can do in meditation practices. Reading fiction, turns out that reading like science fiction or reading anything that transports your mind into the mind of someone else activates this brain network, but not the executive attention network, which I have tried to make a call that we should include science fiction items on the SATs. We would give a lot more kids a chance to actually activate this brain network. Reflective compassion. So David, who does a lot of great research on compassion, we were talking last night on the way back to the hotel about how our research programs really do relate, in the sense that in order to have compassion, it actually requires imagination. So in order for me to really care that someone is suffering and someone is, and there's been studies my colleagues and I have done where people read vignettes of lots of vignettes that are very tug at your heartstrings. So maybe one story of a mother who makes a sacrifice for her child in a third world country. She says, "No, please take my last cake. I already had one," but she didn't already have one, and so your heart breaks. But it turns out the more you give people an opportunity to daydream and reflect on the meaning of that experience, and the greater activation you see in this default mode or imagination network, when they come back, their responses are much more cognitively complex. They also show a lot more compassion. So I do think that we make this false dichotomy between, flighty kind of cognitive processes like imagination and creativity and cognitive complexity. They actually don't. It's a different kind of cognitive complexity, but it's equally as important as the kind of cognitive complexity you see in IQ tests. So I want to make that point.